Hi everyone, welcome back to Radical Practice, Living the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to welcome back a speaker who actually spoke to us yesterday, Matthew Remski. Matthew has been practicing meditation since 1996 and asana since 2000. He's taught yoga, yoga philosophy, and Ayurveda in Toronto and beyond since 2005. He maintains an active Ayurveda consultation practice from his home, which he shares with his partner Alex and their son Jacob. He's authored several books on yoga and related subjects and is working towards completing What Are We Actually Doing in Asana, an examination of pain, injury, and healing in modern yoga. His blog hosts an average of 20,000 readers per month, which you can find at matthewremski.com. So with that, please welcome again Matthew Remski and his second talk, Arjuna and Climate Change, a thought experiment inspired by the Bhagavad Gita.
Hi, my name is Matthew Remski, and I'd like to thank Jacob Kyle and the whole Embodied philosophy crew for inviting me to say a few words about the Bhagavad Gita on this illustrious panel. I will be speaking not as a Sanskritist or as an academic or as a devotee, although I've had many brushes actually with devotionalism. I'll get to that story in a moment. I'll be speaking as a lay practitioner of modern yoga who encountered this text in an eclectic way and has struggled to learn it and to read it and to imbibe from it over the last about 20 years. It's actually more than that, because here's the story. I'm 45 now, and at 19 I was canvassing for Greenpeace. And it was the middle of the winter. I'd left home about 2 years before. I was writing novels and doing social activism. And I was tramping around in Rosedale, which is a very rich part of Toronto, knocking on doors and, getting donations from people who were, slowly getting drunk at Christmas parties and didn't really care about the ecological pitch that I was giving to them, but were generous enough, or at least well-juiced enough, that they were handing out $20 bills or $50 bills and sort of, happy to see me go away in my shabby chic, Goodwill wardrobe onto the next house. And I was depressed, as you can imagine. Long driveways, big SUVs in every driveway, and here I am talking about not climate change at that point. That wasn't Greenpeace's thing, but certainly ozone pollution, dioxin poisoning from paper mills. We tackled a whole bunch of issues, and it seemed endless and obscene. And so I'm standing in the corner of this rich neighborhood, which happens to be 2 or 3 blocks away from the main Hare Krishna temple in Toronto, which there's a funny story there too. It was actually acquired by the group through subterfuge. They lied to the realtor, they sent some agent or something like that. Anyway, it was an old church, and definitely the old church board of directors did not want to sell it to this group. So that's kind of a funny thing. Weird to have the temple right in the middle of kind of the gold-plated downtown core. I'm on the corner smoking a cigarette, and I hear a voice behind me who says something like, are you lost, or what's going on? And I turn around, and there's a guy who's about my age, except he's terribly thinner than I, and he's in saffron robes, and I look down, and he's wearing like saffron socks and flip-flops, and he's covered in slush. And he must be freezing cold, but he's not. He's just glowing. He's bright and cheerful, and he's carrying a couple of bags of milk. And he says, and he asks me what I'm doing. I tell him, and he says, "Well, looks like you're bored. Come on to the temple. There's dinner. It's almost dinner time." So I go and I eat with him, and we pass by the open door of the main temple room, and there's about 100 devotees in there, and they're chanting away, and it looks beautiful and warm and inviting and ecstatic. And I'm also a little bit disarmed by it all, thinking that I've got to go back out onto the streets to save the planet. And we sat across each other from dinner. It was kind of like this thali plate of different colored slop. Some of it was okay. A lot of it wasn't that tasty, but the conversation was awesome because he really challenged me. I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Oh man, that's never going to work." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, you can't possibly save the world without devoting your life to God or to Krishna or to the absolute," whatever word he used. He said, "There's always going to be suffering. Do you really think personally that you can change that? Don't you think that's all in the hands of the absolute?" And it was very persuasive, especially to somebody who was cold and poor and really didn't know what he was doing with his life. And at the same time, I had this lingering thought that we had come from the same background. Our skin was the same color. He seemed to be well educated. How was it that this guy somehow had bought onto this entire story of salvation when everybody else that I knew in my generation had moved away from that kind of aspiration? I asked him, it sounds like you really believe in salvation. You really believe in communion, in eternal oneness. You really believe that you are part of the divine, or you're participating in a divine or absolute condition. And he said, "Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any other way to do it. Like, what else would make sense?" And I had no answer for him. And in a way, I still don't. Although one of my main sort of pressing concerns in life and practice is trying to see where my internal world meets my external circumstance. And the primary external circumstance or concern in my context is ecology. And so I want to dedicate this presentation to that guy because he's challenged me to look at the Gita. Oh, by the way, that's how I got the book. I forgot to mention. We're going back out, and he grabs the Bhagavad Gita as it is, big thick hardcover, the one, off the shelf, and he hands it to me, thrusts it in my hands. He says, this is it. This will save your life. Don't you want to come into chant? I'm like, I'm okay for the chanting. And off I went. But I read the book. I probably stayed up most of that night reading the book, looking at the pictures as well, which were strangely resonant with the Catholic popular art from the 19th century that I'd grown up with. And in fact, I just talked to a colleague. I interviewed a Hare Krishna devotee in Washington, D.C., who's this fine Hatha yoga teacher as well. His name is Hari Kirtana Das. And he said, yeah, actually, Swami Prabhupada, the leader of the Hare Krishna movement, he actively headhunted artists who were skilled in kind of pop Renaissance Western art in order to make those images more attractive. There was a whole workshop in Los Angeles, and it was this whole thing. It was a very conscious attempt to make the spiritual narrative of the Bhagavad Gita particularly attractive to me. So anyway, whoever that guy is, he was kind of my doppelganger, the person who took the road that I didn't. I hope he's well now. I hope he has found what he's looking for. I know that I haven't. And he's helped me to frame my ecological activist concerns through this text. So that's what I'll be speaking about today. And I do want to say that my position with regard to reading and engaging this text is secular. It's non-academic, non-Sanskritist. It's not part of any parampara. I haven't sat at the foot of any teacher, oral tradition teacher, for any length of time. So I don't lay claim to any sort of incursion into that territory, and which I respect greatly. So yeah, with that, I'll toggle back and forth between talking head, and I've got a PDF presentation that I'll scroll through to help organize my thoughts and maybe focus things. I'll also try to keep my eye on the time and make sure that I don't go over too much. Yeah, so away we go. So let me find screen share here. Okay, so the title that I'm working with is Arjuna's Today, a Bhagavad Gita thought experiment. So there's my name and details. I have an email address there that if anybody has any questions or thoughts or criticisms or or if they'd like to report me in any way for what follows, please feel free to get in touch, and I'll be happy to hear from you. This is an image of me actually trying to figure out this book. You can see it's a melancholic enterprise. I'm very confused by this impossible object. You can see my left hand has become bloated and so on. And I have a little mournful medieval toque on. It's a really, really complicated, beautiful book. And I think it's filled with enough tension and perhaps even contradiction that that's what speaks to its greatness through the ages. I think one thing that we can say, speaking as a literature student, about wonderful books that have huge international and cross-cultural appeal and trans-historical appeal, is that they're complex. And so I'd like to honor that complexity with the following 3 goals that I will, in Gita form, pursue with as little attachment as possible. So number 1 is I would like to participate in reading and relating to this ancient text as a practice of constant learning that demands humility and openness, as well as resistance towards powerful, normative, or hidden and internalized views. I think that this is kind of like practicing yoga. So I would say that if I don't have a traditional doorway into this text, I still believe that I can engage with it with a kind of exploratory attitude that allows for both self-examination and cultural insight, and that it will allow me to see my own actions a little bit more clearly. And I think that's very much in line with many people's aspirations in modern yoga. Specifically, in this presentation, I'd like to do maybe not a close reading, but at least a good reading of the Gita's discourse around and beyond ritual action, which is kind of the turning point of Arjuna's education and how to move forward. Why do we do things? With what expectations? How can we do things that leave positive adaptive traces or no traces at all? Traces here being my gloss for karma. How do we accomplish this under profound uncertainty and stress, which is Arjuna's condition? And how does the Gita predict the modern psychology of optimal and sustainable experience? And then thirdly, I'd like to explore Arjuna's despondency in the light of our own political and psychological paralysis before the reality of climate disaster. So here's one of my key points for reading and engaging, is that I think it's easy for the narrative of this book, especially to the non-Indian audience, to become something of an exotic museum piece. And so for many years, I've been searching for a way in which to frame it in such a way, and to frame it in terms of the emotional impact that it really carries. Arjuna, as you know, is confronted with a task of going to war against his relatives and against his gurus, against people who have taught him everything that he now relies on, including Dronacharya, who is his archery master. And what we should know, what we should acknowledge is that particular task arrived at through this incredible winding story of intrigue and betrayal and political allegiances and reorganizations that the Mahabharata tells. This position that he finds himself in is completely intolerable. To recognize that you're going to have to go to war against your guru in this culture is about the worst pickle that you could be in. So what that feels like, I think can be romanticized, exoticized, fossilized even. And I would say that understanding each and every one of us as standing in Arjuna's place with regard to the imminent catastrophe of climate change is a way of bringing that moment into present awareness in an emotional sense. And I think that's really important given the fact that this is a narrative. It is a story. And as a story, it has a powerful and often unconscious movement within it that stirs us in places that we can't necessarily see.